look, a movie about a living human boy accidentally getting engaged to a rotting corpse bride. Oh well, there's nothing wrong with that. Right? Right? Caution! The following video is an in-depth review of the movie I'm currently reviewing, which means that there will be massive spoilers in the review. If you haven't seen this movie yet, then please feel free to watch this movie first before watching this video. However, if you have already seen this movie, or you just want to know my thoughts on this movie, then keep watching. I had originally reviewed Corpse Bride way back in 2011, and it was one of my earlier movie reviews that I had done at the time. So, now that I look back at my original review of Corpse Bride, I find it mildly cringe-inducing since this was way before my reviews 2.0 period. This was before I really got in depth with my reviews, and in my original review, I seemed to just give out a Cliff Notes version of the film's summary and only gave out vague details about my thoughts on the film. With that being said, I wanted to go back and dive into this film again so that I could actually give out a more detailed exploration on my thoughts about the film, without worrying about whether or not I would spoil the film for anyone. Of course, now I have a spoiler warning accompanying my reviews now, so no worries there. I also noticed that after I recently rewatched this film, there were many elements of the film that I actually missed out on when I first reviewed this movie. With that being said, those missing elements actually made the film much more complex than I originally thought, and I would love to dive into those elements and see if those added elements actually changed my opinions about this film. So before I get into my more in-depth review of this movie, I would like to give out a brief summary of this film. The film starts out with a young man named Victor being engaged to a shy woman named Victoria, since their marriage would benefit their family's standings in society. Victor's parents want to be part of high society, while Victoria's parents are suffering from financial problems, and this marriage will help out with their financial standing. One day, however, when Victor and Victoria were practicing their vows during the wedding rehearsal, Victor is so nervous that he ends up messing up his vows, and he decided to leave the rehearsals to practice his vows. Once Victor reaches the woods, he accidentally places his wedding ring on a skeletal finger that was in the ground while he was practicing his vows, and suddenly a corpse being rises out of the ground. It turns out that the corpse being is the corpse bride named Emily, and when she sees the wedding ring on her skeletal finger, she believes that Victor had proposed marriage to her, and she ends up taking Victor to the world of the dead. Now Victor has to figure out a way to get out of his engagement with the corpse bride so that he can return back to the world of living. Corpse Bride was quite an unusual film when it came out in 2005. It was the first film from the then newcomer animation company Leica Entertainment, which was responsible for creating movies like Coraline and Paranorman. It was also seen as a spiritual successor to The Nightmare Before Christmas, which was another Tim Burton helmed project that had a morbid setting, charismatic characters, and was an animated musical. I never would have thought that we would get another movie that was nearly similar to The Nightmare Before Christmas, in terms of having an animated musical that's focused on horror elements, and yet features characters who have monstrous appearances, but are actually quite friendly characters once their true personalities are brought to the surface. This has always been a staple of Tim Burton's works, as his movies usually feature monstrous or odd characters with friendly personalities who are usually misunderstood by the public at large. And that's what I always loved about his films, as his films will encourage the audience to accept people who are different from you, and Corpse Bride was no exception, as I would go into much later. One of the major aspects of the film that I really enjoyed was the premise of the movie. I will admit that at first, the idea about Corpse Bride falling in love with a living human boy did creep me out a bit. But once we are introduced to the characters and I started seeing how likable Emily the Corpse Bride was, I started to feel more comfortable about the concept of the movie. I was also kind of rooting for Emily to be with Victor in the end of the movie, but then after seeing this movie a second time, I can actually understand the tragedy of the situation, which I'll go into later. I was also interested in how this film portrayed the world of the living and the world of the dead respectively. The world of the living is shown as being a dull and lifeless place, while the world of the dead is shown as being a lively and colorful place. Is it just me, or is it supposed to be the other way around, with the world of the dead being a dull and unpleasant place, while the world of the living is supposed to be a lively and colorful place? This is another staple of Tim Burton's works, as his movies usually portray the world of the living as being a boring and uninspiring place, while the world of the dead is usually portrayed as being interesting and unique. It makes me question about what kind of message this film is trying to send here. Is it saying that being dead is more interesting than being alive, or is it saying that being different and unique is more interesting than being normal? If it's the latter, then I definitely agree with the sentiment that being different and a bit odd is way more interesting than being too normal. Now let's move on to the characters themselves. I really like the main characters Victor, Victoria, Emily themselves, as they were the most interesting characters in the entire film. Victor was quite an interesting character in the film, as I found his character development throughout the film to be fascinating. At the start of the film, Victor was shown as being very meek, and he would easily get frightened by everything around him, including getting married to Victoria. But as the film progresses, he becomes a much braver and outspoken character, and it's all thanks to his experience in the underworld. I think Victor's development as a character came about when he accidentally got engaged to Emily, the corpse bride, and it was then that he started to realize that what he really wanted was to be with Victoria. He literally had to fight through all the problems presented in the story in order to win Victoria's heart, even if that means going up against Laura Barker's Bitter. I do like the fact that Victor remains to be a kind-hearted character throughout the film, even if he did make some questionable decisions regarding Emily. Emily is probably my most favorite character in the entire film, since she is such a lively and free-spirited character, despite, being dead. I like the fact that Emily remained to be optimistic throughout the film, despite the fact that she's dead, as it made her into such an endearing character. I was actually rooting for Emily and Victor to be together in the end of the film, since I actually sympathized with Emily's situation, and I wanted her to earn her own happiness that was denied to her when she was alive. However, like Victor, Emily also goes through some character development of her own as she begins to learn throughout the film that forcing someone to marry you when they clearly don't love you is not the right way to go. Emily learns that sometimes you have to sacrifice your own happiness in order to help the person that you care about get the happiness that they wanted or deserved. Victoria was another character that I liked, but I felt had the least development out of the three main characters. Victoria is shown as being just as shy and friendly as Victor is, and she is the perfect example of an arranged marriage going right, since she and Victor have a lot in common with each other and actually do love each other. However, we don't quite spend a lot of time with her, as the bulk of the film is focused on Emily and Victor's relationship with each other, and I actually wish that we had more scenes with Victoria. Laura Barker's Bitter was quite a mystery to me in this film. We already know that he's the bad guy of this piece, based on the fact that he always has an unsettling grin on his face. I love the scenes where he comes out of the shadows without any notice, as it makes him look so mysterious and terrifying at the same time. But his character suffers from the same problem that I had with Oogie Boogie from The Nightmare Before Christmas. We don't really know much about Laura Barker's Bitter, other than the fact that he is a gold digger who marries women for their money, and that he was the one who murdered Emily many years ago. What a major plot twist. I often have to wonder to myself about how many women did Lord Barkis marry and then killed over the years before he got to Emily and nearly did the same thing to Victoria. And how long has he been performing these crimes? Did something inside him just snap when he was younger? And did he just up and decide that being a serial killer was the way to go for his life? I do understand that we don't necessarily have to know much about Lord Barkis' backstory since it's not quite relevant to the plot, but I still wanted to know more about his character and how he became the man he is now. And now let's go to one of the biggest moments in the film that I really wanted to discuss, and that's the ending. I mentioned in my original review that I wanted Victor and Emily to end up together instead of Victor ending up with Victoria. While a small part of me still wanted that to happen in this film, I can actually understand why Victor and Emily didn't end up together. For one thing, Emily is dead, while Victor is alive, and I was actually surprised that this point wasn't quite brought up early on in the film. So, Emily spent most of the film thinking that she and Victor were going to be together, despite the fact that she's already dead. And yet, she didn't realize the problem with this situation until her friends told her that in order for her and Victor to remain together forever, Victor would have to die? I can see Emily's desperation in wanting to marry Victor because she wanted to experience the happiness of loving someone that was taken away from her when she was murdered. But then again, this actually added more to Emily's character development. When Emily saw that Victor was willing to drink the poison that would kill him so he could marry her, it was then that Emily realized just how selfish she was being towards Victor. Emily saw that Victor still loved Victoria, and she felt that it wouldn't be right for Victor to sacrifice his own life to be with her and deny Victoria her happiness if she had taken Victor away from her. It shows how selfless Emily has become during the course of the film. I'm assuming that the reason why Emily was able to move on to the afterlife at the end of the film was because she saw how happy Victor was with Victoria, and that gave her peace. Also, and I can't believe that I overlooked this in my original review, but it wouldn't have been fair to Victoria and Victor just up and marry Emily. Victoria was engaged to Victor first, and if Victor and Emily did end up together, what would happen to Victoria? Either Victoria would have still been married to Lord Barkis and be miserable for the rest of her life, or Lord Barkis would have killed her after he discovers that Victoria's family doesn't have any money under their name. Either way, things would have ended pretty badly for Victoria, and I wouldn't want the movie to end that way, especially since Victoria is such a sweet character. There were many other aspects that I liked about the film. I felt that the stop-motion animation shown here was much more fluid compared to what I saw with The Nightmare Before Christmas. Although, to be fair, The Nightmare Before Christmas was made in 1993, a whole decade before Corpse Bride came out. So of course the studios would have more time to improve on the animation techniques, although the animation for The Nightmare Before Christmas still looks good to this very day. Anyway, I also love the way that the film managed to keep a balance between the comedy and the horror. The film can get scary at times, especially with the nightmare faces that Emily pulls whenever she is angry, but it never went too far with the scare factor. There were also some humorous moments in the film, such as the many scenes with the wacky cynicism of the underworld that I couldn't help but chuckle at whenever they came on. I especially love the scene where the dead came to the world of the living for Victor and Emily's wedding, and we get to see the people in the living world start rejoicing when they saw their dead loved ones. Now, I don't know if I would actually react the same way the people in the living world did when their deceased loved ones came back. I probably would have been screaming my head off if I saw zombified versions of my deceased loved ones. But this scene was really heartwarming and hilarious, and it was probably one of my favorite scenes in the movie. Now, if there was some problems that I had with this film, it was that I felt that there were some plot holes in the film. There were some moments in the film where I think that situation wasn't quite resolved, and we are left hanging over what happens next. For instance, what happened to Victor's parents after their coach driver suddenly died, and the carriage just rode off into the distance without Victor's parents noticing what happened to the driver? And what happened to Victoria's parents after the dead came to the world of the living and scared them off? Did any of them ever find out that Victor and Victoria are back together again? And did they all become better people in the end of the movie? We don't really know for sure because the film ended before any of that was resolved. Also, I felt that the film didn't really develop some characters fully, with the exceptions of Emily and Victor. I had complained before that Victoria didn't really have much screen time in the film, and I actually wish that we had more scenes of Victoria with either Victor or even Emily. It would have been pretty interesting if Victoria was the one who convinces Emily that Emily is being selfish with Victor and that she should allow Victor to be happy instead of forcing him to a life of possible misery. I had also pointed out in my original review that I thought that Lord Barkis was just thrown into the movie just so the movie would have a villain for the piece. I was wrong. Having Lord Barkis in the film actually brought some weight to the plot of the film, as he was the catalyst to Emily not being able to move on, since he practically stole Emily's chance for happiness when he murdered her in the past. And last but certainly not least, while I found some of the songs in the movie to be fun to listen to, I don't think they were as memorable as the songs in The Nightmare Before Christmas. For example, when I listened to the first song in the movie, According to Plan, I don't have the same excitement that I had for the song This Is Halloween. And the funny thing is, the soundtrack for both The Corpse Bride and The Nightmare Before Christmas were performed by Danny Elfman. Such irony. Corpse Bride is rated PG for some scary images and action and brief mild language. There is some scary imagery in this movie, including the images of the dead themselves and some scenes where Emily is showing a terrifying face whenever she's angry. But the movie manages to never be too scary, although it is slightly more intense than The Nightmare Before Christmas due to the theme of murder being prevalent in the movie. There is some language in the film, although it only occurs during the last half of the movie, and is nothing too strong. In my original review of this movie, I originally gave this movie a score of an 8 out of 10. But after rewatching this movie again after all these years, and noticing some elements that I didn't notice before, I'm giving this movie a score of an 8.9 out of 10. All of the added elements that I didn't notice before actually gave more depth to this movie, and made my second viewing of this movie even more memorable than the first. The visuals were creative and creepy, and the stop-motion animation was very well done. However, I do think that the movie would have had a better score if they had actually developed some of the characters a bit better and had actually resolved some of the hanging plot points in the movie. Hope you enjoyed my review of Corpse Bride.